sticking with us. We'll go back, cover over what we went to in case you're new. We were talking about Clemson dropping down to number 2 and if it's actually warranted for what used to be the top team in the nation to drop a spot, even when there are other teams like Alabama and their defense have questions as well. So, Hannah, I'm going to let you kind of take it from there, give everyone a little bit of a synopsis on what we were talking about before. Hopefully I'm not too robotic.
Yes, I mean, we kind of broke down the Clemson law. I mean, not Clemson laws. Clemson barely winning that game. I talked about Matt Brown, and I think this is one of the reasons why he's not at Texas anymore was this poor decision. If I'm Matt Brown, I'm going for an extra point. I'm tying the game. I'm going to allow my defense to get the ball back from offense, may have 25, 30 seconds to try to score. Worst case scenario, Clemson scores, you get the ball back, or you both go in overtime. And at that point, Matt Brown and the North Carolina Tar Heels had the momentum in that game in the fourth quarter. Should have relied on that. Instead, you made a poor decision going for 2, losing the game. But Clemson played poorly most of that game. They had some moments where they were Clemson, but they had some moments where they weren't. And when you look historically, especially with this committee and this system, they want to see a consistent team, especially after winning national championship. Clemson has a target on their back. They have to play consistent ball, and they didn't last week. And so you see a team like Clemson struggling against an unranked team, going down to number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, not really matter right now. Alabama's not happy that they're number 1. They don't want the target on their back. They play better ball when they're not ranked number 1. But it is what it is. But if you're a Clemson fan, you don't need to fret. It doesn't really matter. Rankings don't matter. If you're in the top 4, top 5, you're fine. Don't worry about it. If you're Alabama, you've got to remember that you're now the target and everyone's coming after you.
Absolutely. Ian, thank you. Appreciate that. Nathan, you as well for letting me know the sound sounds good. Also, Steven says, not related to football, but hockey starts tonight, and he's ready to see his Blues defend their cup.
Yeah.
I'll give you credit here, Steven. I was not a guy picking the Blues all last postseason, even all the way up until the end. I think I was saying they weren't going to make it. So I give them credit. They were a tough team that stuck it out and wound up being the Stanley Cup champions on the back of a great performance in goal by Binnington. I think that team, even though I'm not going to pick them again to win, hockey is an incredibly tough sport to defend in. I think they should be in store for a pretty good season this year as well.
Yeah.
Jeremy, good to see you, man. He says, my opinion is that if you are at home and you kick the extra point, road game, you go for the win, especially against such high-caliber team. I don't know. I think you just got to take the chances, Jeremy.
I don't know.
We're talking about Clemson again here. I think you take your chances and say, hey, we're one play away from beating them. Let's not give them the chance to even go into overtime. I understand the thought process of going for it at home, or kicking the extra point at home, going for overtime at home. But when you're that outgunned, I think it's almost better to just roll the dice and say we can get 2 yards on one play.
Well, I mean, I think the situation's this. If you'd have had 2 seconds left in the game, I would have probably gone for 2. But the fact that you still had over a minute to play in the game, it's not really a logical decision to go for 2 because they're still going to get the ball back regardless. Yeah, you kick an onside kick. They did not go well. Or if you get the extra 2 points, you only get by 1, you're kicking the ball, you're going to have to rely on your defense. In my opinion, it seems better to go for 1 point and then and rely on your defense. Now, I'm saying if there would have been 1 second left in the clock, yes, go for 2 because they're not going to get. You're gonna lose regardless at this point. You could tie the game and go in overtime, but if you're at home, I mean, you're going to have more momentum than if you're on the road. But I think it was just a poor decision by Matt Brown. Once again, one of the reasons why he's no longer at Texas. And, it's just unfortunate for a team like North Carolina who could really use his momentum going into their game against Georgia Tech this week.
I agree. And Shannon says Ohio State should be number 1. Go Bucks. I think they're getting up there. Is it about time where we say maybe it's time for Ohio State to be included? I'm going to say I think Ohio State needs to be in that conversation until they have their bad loss that they seem to have every year. So far, they've avoided it. So I give them credit. I say Ohio State should be in the conversation. It's tough to put Ohio State over a team that's in front of them until one of those teams loses, though, for me.
Yeah.
Again, maybe with Clemson in their competition, if Ohio State plays tougher games, like if the Ohio State played in the SEC, I'd say maybe they stand a chance to jump them. Like LSU, Auburn, those teams play such a difficult schedule that they could jump them. I just don't think it's fair to a team that is playing a similar schedule to you in Clemson, and neither team's lost. I think until one of those teams loses, Ohio State's going to be behind them until the college committee puts them out in front.
And I mean, the thing is this, if you're an Ohio State fan, you just want to be in the top 4. I don't think it really matters where you are at this point. Now, in a couple of weeks, like I said, 3, 4, 5 weeks on the road, where your place is important because if you're an Ohio State, you want to be careful who you're playing week 1. If you're Ohio State, you don't want to play Clemson in the first game of the playoffs. You want to play in Alabama or even Georgia with a little bit of history. Playing Clemson week 1, not really a good dynamic there for Ohio State fan. But right now, you're in the top 4. Be happy with that. And honestly, for Ohio State, win out. Because right now it doesn't even matter because you've been this place before. You have to focus on not losing against Michigan State, not losing to Iowa State, beating those teams that seem to get you each and every year. Let your game do the talking. Don't worry about where you're ranked right now.
Absolutely. And Nathan, if you want a Sports Around the t-shirt right now, you can click on our About tab. In there's a link to our Teespring store, which sells a bunch of merchandise. Coming in the next couple of days, we're actually going to have a store on Facebook, so if you want to wait for that, we are going to have a tab that you're going to be able to click on if you want any kind of Sports Around the Bar merchandise. Hopefully, we're going to be leveling that up soon. We're in talks with some other people. I know, I've been saying that for like 3.5 years, but sooner or later, I promise, I'm going to get something done, and you'll have a store on Facebook as well, so it's real simple. You can pay through Facebook. Right now, we have a Teespring store if you want to look at that. We appreciate the comment on that. Also, Ian says Iowa is going to take it to Michigan. Well, we're going to be talking about that game. Anytime a 14 plays a 19, I think we're going to be talking about that. I think they have to be the favorite. We'll go into that a little more in depth after we talk about this last week here. But I'm with you, Ian. I think Iowa definitely is the favorite there.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I actually brought our conversation up to a Michigan fan. I was at a CrossFit competition on Saturday in Franklin, and we won. I'll say we got first out of 25 teams. I was pretty impressed with ourselves. But I actually met a diehard Michigan fan and asked him, I was like, are you like, you look at the program, you look at where Harbaugh's taking it. I told him that we had this conversation of whether or not he was in the hot seat, people are gone. He's like, everyone he knows loves him. Now, do they wish they would win more games? Yes. But he's like, right now, when you ask a Michigan fan, what were their expectations of Jim Harbaugh? Some people wanted to win a national championship. Most people wanted to restore a program in a positive light. They wanted a team that brought excitement. They wanted a coach to come in and kind of get some recruiting and just kind of restore a program that was really in the So, I mean, yeah, there's a good chance Michigan's not going to win a lot of the games they should win. But he said in 2 or 3 years, if they're still not beating Ohio State or Michigan State, and he said this, the difference in Michigan now than even 10, 15 years ago is you have way more teams like Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State. You have so many more teams they regularly play that are better than they used to be. He said if they were playing teams that were horrible, then yeah, they should win. But when you have a lot of these teams still in the top 25 they're playing, says a lot. They have a really hard schedule.
I agree. Also, Steve says John Tavares named captain for his Leafs. First captain in 25 years. Yeah, that's impressive, but it's also because your other center, Austin Matthews, just went out and embarrassed himself in public. Yeah. Go look that up. I'm not going to dig into that, but he got caught walking around in his underwear in public, among other things. So there's a reason they didn't choose Austin Matthews. There's a reason it's Tavares. Not that Tavares isn't worthy. I think he's an amazing player. I actually wish he didn't sign with the Leafs because, I mean, that is a fantastic top line that they have. I think when you look at the Maple Leafs, though, again, do they have the goaltending they're going to need to win the Stanley Cup? I got my questions. That's all I can say. I got my questions. I don't think they're quite good enough.
I agree, Jeremy. I do need a shirt.
And Sharif says Mac Brown will make UNC a contender next year. Next year might be a little early for me, but he definitely seems to have him on track. I think this is more of a trip-up game for Clemson. Yeah. They went into this thinking they were going to steamroll, and we've seen them kind of not play well at times this year as well. Trevor Lawrence only throwing for 200 yards. This doesn't look like Clemson from last year that pretty much freight-trained everybody at Syracuse. I think between losing all the talent to the NFL draft last season, and it seems like a bit of a mentality thing, Clemson has a lot to overcome towards the end of it. Does that mean UNC is going to be a contender next year? A contender for what? Maybe they'll sneak into the top 25. Maybe we'll be talking about them in week 5, but do I see UNC sticking it out? Probably not. They seem to be the second best in a bad conference.
Well, North Carolina needs time to rebuild. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's fresh into this program. Mac Brown needs time to recruit. That's been one of the biggest things you've seen programs. Yeah. Texas A&M, we'll talk about them a little bit. I think they came into the season very, very, very overrated. I think that, Jimbo Fisher's done a really good job with them, but they're not at their prime. Jimbo Fisher has to have time to bring his own players, put his own spin on a program. He's still working through players that Kevin Sumlin had under his belt. So you have to give coaches 3 or 4 years with recruiting, with bringing in a new program, even Dan Mullen at Florida. Maybe the hype, which I think is a little too high in Gainesville. Yes, I think right now the hype with Dan Mullen, what he did at Mississippi State, is really high in Gainesville. But I think doing the right thing, give him 1 or 2 more years where he has his own players that he's recruited, done a good job with, getting rid of the quarterbacks to Felipe Franks, bringing in really solid, good defensive players that they need on defense. Then, we're going to talk about the hype. But North Carolina, they're not going to be a team to watch out for win the championship. They're going to team to be watching out to be relevant. And that's what they need is be relevant in the top 25.
And Chris says Ohio State hasn't played a contender all year, and when they do, they'll lose as always. Look, they tend to do even well in their conference against high-ranked opponents. They just seem to have a Purdue every year, or Indiana, or somebody that seems to upset them year in and year out, and that kind of throws a little bit of controversy in. But I got to give Ryan Day credit. I thought this would be one of Ohio State's most susceptible years, having changed head coaches. I think the opposite has happened. I think they've been even steadier than they were even under Urban Meyer. I mean, it's been consistent football out of Ohio State. This might be the best team we've seen out of them in years.
Yeah, and I mean, I think another team to watch out for in a couple of years is going to be Oklahoma. What's going to happen to Lincoln Riley? Lincoln Riley's a coach that inhibited and was kind of given an amazing opportunity there from Stoops. But he's still playing with a lot of guys he brought. Now, I'm going to be honest. I could have probably gotten Oklahoma that far with Baker Mayfield and the defense they had. But now you're looking at a new defense coordinator. You're looking at a lot of the other things happening with Oklahoma. In a couple of years, if Oklahoma's not where they're going to be, we're going to be talking about Lincoln Riley. What's his next step? Is he on the hot seat? The thing is, you give coaches a few years of grace when it comes to we're building a program. But if they're not providing results, then that's going to be an issue. And so I think we're going to see Dan Mullen. We're going to be talking about Lincoln Riley. We're going to be talking about Mac Brown. We're going to be talking about tons of guys that have not quite done what they should have done. Mario Cristobal at Oregon's going to be one in a couple of years if he doesn't provide good results in the Pac-12. There's just a lot of speculation right now. And I think Harbaugh, out of all of them, I think Harbaugh has the most comfort cushion seat, not so much hot, because of the expectation there at Michigan and what they really wanted him for.
Absolutely. Nathan, if you do need help finding it, man, you can always message me after the show. Shoot something to Sports Around the Bar. I'll help you find it. Yeah. Jeremy, I appreciate you trying to help him out. And also Steven, who won his shirt in a beer bet with Drew. You should have it in the next 2 days. If you don't, go ahead and shoot us a message, and I'll reach out to Teespring and see what's going on. Jeremy also says, if you get rid of Harbaugh, who do you hire? And that's kind of what we were scratching our heads over all last show, saying, look, everyone's calling for the man's head, but right now I don't see a lot of guys out there. Mine were guys like Jimbo Fisher or maybe even Les Miles that even though they're new into a program, they're at smaller schools than what their caliber probably could go and you could land them for. They have a higher pedigree, I think, than what teams like Kansas and Texas A&M are used to landing at head coach. That's who I would ask. And if short of me being able to lure one of those guys away, pay a bunch of money to buy him out of his contract, I think that's I'm probably going to stick with Jim Harbaugh again. Now, I think you almost have to.
Yeah, I'm going to give you 3 other coaches. I kind of tapped this up this week because I wasn't sure if we were going to talk about this or not. But there's 3 other coaches that I think are probably on a little harder of a seat than Jim Harbaugh. Charlie Strong of South Florida. That's probably one of the coaches that I'm circling because let's look at it. He won 17 of his first 19 games there for South Florida. Had a really awesome year. This year, they've struggled. I mean, their only win since last October, I believe, was against South Carolina State. So if you're Charlie Strong, you've got to rebuild. You've got to bring some excitement and some hope for a program that actually has a really good quarterback in Blake Barnett. Now, another guy I think that we're forgetting about is Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. I mean, coming out from Alabama under Nick Saban, you look at other coaches, Jim McElwain, even Will Muschamp. I mean, all these guys who have worked with him at some point. Jeremy Pruitt's probably the one biggest disappointment right now. Of course, losing one of the first home games of the season, struggled continuously, lost to Florida. Winning some smaller games, but should be winning bigger games. I think he's going to be on the hot seat. And then another guy that I think we're forgetting about is Clay Helton there at USC. Not really done as much as people thought he would. I mean, I think USC came in really hot into the season. People thought they're going to be a really good contender for the Pac-12, but they've been a little disappointing. So those are some other coaches besides Jim Harbaugh that I tapped out that actually I think are on a hotter seat than Jim Harbaugh himself.
The only name I'll kind of contest is Jeremy Pruitt. Even though I know he's had a terrible year this year for Tennessee, they're still paying Butch Jones a lot of money to not coach for the university. I don't see them firing another coach, paying 2 of them high dollars to exit a contract early, and then going and spending another massive contract to lure in another level coach. As bad as it's been for Tennessee, I think they're stuck with Jeremy Pruitt, unfortunately.
Well, I
think the rest of those names deserve to be on that list too.
Yeah.
But you're right. If next year goes poorly, depending on how long they have to pay Butch Jones, that might be all she wrote for Jeremy Pruitt. Even though 3 years is not exactly the kind of turnaround you want to have for a head coach. Usually you want to get to 4 or 5 in college, so they've had a chance to bring up their own players. They've had their guys turn into seniors and get to play. But if that's what it's got to be, Tennessee obviously needs to win games against like BYU. They need to beat, Charleston Southern? No, it wasn't Charleston Southern. Who was it? It was Georgia State, I think, this year.
Yeah.
They got to win those games. And if they don't, then Jeremy Pruitt, probably his head will roll before too long. I think for right now, he's still probably safe until next season's over.
And I think a lot of it, I mean, it's part of putting Fulmer back into the program. I mean, when you give him power, you give him control, especially with a program like Tennessee, you're kind of deadening some areas. And I think you see a guy who has a lot of control that probably shouldn't, and is kind of hurting the program. And when you have a guy like Jeremy Pruitt who brings a lot of excitement in the beginning, and you kind of squash that and squander that along the way, that's an issue. So I don't even think necessarily it's all Jeremy Pruitt. I think it's the people above him, including Philip Fulmer. And it's just sad when you see so much talent. There's a lot of talent on the Tennessee team. They're just not being utilized well, and I think that's something we're going to have to see if Jeremy Pruitt can actually pull them out of the gauntlet and out of the ditch and say, hey, we have potential. Let's show that.
Absolutely. A couple more of these comments. Sean, good to see you, man, as always. Sharif says, if Jim Harbaugh loses to Ohio State, he will be the next Miami Dolphins coach/GM. We heard it there first.
Yeah.
Do you think Brian Flores gets the same treatment that not Wilkes, what was his name, out of Arizona? Do you think he gets the same treatment, the one and done out in South Florida? It could happen. It could definitely happen. They could boot the quarterback, too, and Josh Rosen has all of a sudden had a new team for the third year in a row. It'd be terrible, but it could absolutely happen down there in Miami.
He's asking a good question. How about Lane Kiffin for a top college football program? I don't know.
If I'm Tennessee, do you try to make up with Lane Kiffin? Do you say come back?
No, it will not be Tennessee. Will not be USC either. It will not be Michigan either. I mean, if I'm Lane Kiffin, I'm making good money in Florida. I'm living my best life. I would give it another year or two for them to really prove himself consistently. If he could go anywhere, I mean, I would have seen him for a good fit for the UNC job. Maybe a Louisville, maybe Kentucky if I had to pick a team in the SEC for him to fit. Maybe a South Carolina if that doesn't work out for Muschamp. Maybe Arkansas, honestly, because I don't see him going for like a top-tier job. Not a Pac-12, not a Big 10, not a Big 12. Probably.
I think he could. I think he could. Again, with the success he's had, I think you absolutely need to consider Lane Kiffin one of the top coaches in the NCAA. Even though things have gone poorly for him at USC, they've gone poorly for him at Tennessee, kind of his own fault because things weren't going so bad. I think they won 9 games that year when he was there.
Yep.
He wound up screwing the program over by leaving, and I think that kind of turned off a lot of colleges. I think enough time has passed that if you're a hurting program like you're Michigan and you want to move on from John Harbaugh bad, I think you need to consider with what he's done, hiring him as head coach. I mean, that kind of explosive offense going into a place like Michigan to match up against Ohio State's stellar defense, that's how you beat them, I think. Yep. You run complex and interesting offense, kind of like Lane Kiffin can do. I think he could land one of these higher level jobs if you consider Michigan a higher level job, as long as the opening is there and as long as the school's willing to take a risk. I think that's kind of the match made in heaven. I think Michigan should certainly think about Lane Kiffin.
No, I mean, the thing's this. I mean, Michigan's the not as successful version of Alabama in the way that they're having to replace a big foot in their shoes. And I don't mean Jim Harbaugh's done a lot. I'm talking about he's a big name. And when you're a program like Michigan, you have to bring in someone else that's going to bring excitement, going to bring publicity. Jim Harbaugh ran his mouth too much. And I said this from the beginning. I think he set himself up for failure because of all the expectations he had for himself verbally, that, of course, with satellite camps and all these things, we're going to win national championships. Now, with Alabama, it's having to find a coach that is going to be able to replace Nick Saban, whether or not he dies or retires, whichever one comes first. Now, a lot of people are talking about, of course, who's going to be able to replace him. Could it be Dabo Swinney? Yes, over time, but I think Dabo's living his best life in Clemson. But it's different. It's a different style. It's just going to be very intriguing to see what happens here at Michigan, what happens there at USC. And it's really fascinating to me to see the quicker turnover we're seeing now in college football than even 10 or 15 years ago when, I mean, look at Mike Leach. I mean, look at some of these guys that are been there for quite a while. And then you have programs like the SEC who, I mean, looks like in the last, 10 years, how many coaches are still the same? Very few. So it just brings a really cool perspective into what's really happening. I mean, you have LSU, you have Mississippi
And everything's
State.
speeding up. Look at the transfer portal.
Yeah.
If you look at the way the transfer portal goes, I mean, now players can move. There's a lot more mobility in college football, but we're kind of seeing that across the board. I mean, even the NFL, teams are getting more aggressive. I think as we kind of mature as sports kind of viewers and everything, I don't think we're willing to put up with subpar expectations and subpar performances as long as we used to be. Especially now with social media and how easy it is to come out and start screaming because your team lost this week in a game they should have won. I think it's harder for a program to hang on to a guy that has underperformed at all. So either you're Nick Saban or you're Dabo Swinney that's just ensured their job,
Yep.
Or you're sort of almost always on a hot seat. You're always 2 years away from being fired.
Yep.
All right, couple more of these comments. We'll go rapid fire, and then we'll move into the games to watch this week. Ian says Meyer will end up at USC next year, Urban Meyer. Definitely could happen. I don't put anything past Urban Meyer. It could go there. It could be ACC. If you notice, he likes going to conferences that are down on their luck but have super teams there or have programs with a lot of history that are able to recruit. I don't know that USC is the same program it was, but it definitely has clout being out there. It's great weather. Maybe he recruits really well, and he gets to reestablish the Pac-12 with USC leading the charge again.
Yeah. No, I'm not drinking. I am drinking coffee, so maybe that's why I'm acting crazy. Because I just splashed it again. I need a lot of caffeine. I did not sleep well last night. Yes, Mike leads to straight games, and I'll say this. And we'll talk about this in a little bit after we break down the games. Is obviously the NCAA, what they're kind of wanting to rebuttal against. Letting California pass a law about letting their players get money. We're going to talk about that because, Alabama, of course, getting a really great recruit from the state of California. But will his mind change now that there's a chance for him to make money in the Pac-12 living in California? It's going to be an interesting perspective. But right now, I think it's honestly, you're just seeing the instability of college football on multiple platforms, whether it's being a player, whether it's being a coach, you're seeing the quick turnaround. You used to have, even as a player, let's just look at Greg McElroy, of course, winning national championship there. That was when Colt McCoy was at Texas. It was very rare to see a quarterback get replaced the way it is now. Now you have true freshmen coming in, out playing the older guys. They're getting the positions. They're getting the reps. That's something we didn't even see 5-10 years ago. Now we're seeing a completely different way of game that now, hey, I'm not getting to play, I'm gone. And so I think we're seeing a different change of perspective in football. Don't think it's a bad thing, but I think it's definitely changing.
Finally, Chris says, do you guys think Kelly's job is in trouble if Notre Dame doesn't make the playoffs? I think he bought himself a lot of leeway making the playoffs last year. I don't think the expectation is Notre Dame has to go to the playoffs every single year. But eventually, I think, eventually he'll be back on the hot seat. But for right now, they just made the playoffs. I get it. They kind of got embarrassed by the team that won, 33-3 when they played them, when Notre Dame played Clemson last year in the first round. But still, they made the playoffs. They managed to make a pretty good impact that Notre Dame has not made in a long, long time. My question is there a certain win-loss record where he needs to be considered being fired this year? I think this playoff win gets him a ton of leeway.
Yeah. It's just, sorry, I thought someone was breaking in, and indeed, some random man at the front door. So, yeah, let's just pray I don't get kidnapped. No, I think it's, no, go ahead. What were you saying, though? Because you blinked out a minute ago.
No, it's okay. It's. I was just talking about if Kelly needs to, if Notre Dame needs to ever consider getting rid of Kelly this year, if there's a certain win number that you would think about firing him a year after taking him to the playoffs.
Yes and no. I think Notre Dame's the type of program where I think Brian Kelly's a perfect fit, and I mean that by he's quirky, and I think that he's the type of guy that can somehow continue to prove himself in just the right way to keep Notre Dame fans happy. How many times do we have to see Notre Dame make it to the playoff and get shut down? We saw that against Alabama in 2012 when they lost embarrassingly to Alabama in the national championship game. We've seen it year in, year out when they've not done well. I think the thing is this, if I'm Notre Dame, I'm putting myself in a conference because I want to prove that I am the best. I want to prove that I can win a conference championship game because that's been one of the biggest arguments. Notre Dame doesn't have to play one. So that's one less game. You're not Alabama and Georgia having to compete in the SEC and then maybe play each other again in the college football playoff. It's a different scenario for Notre Dame. I kind of think he's like Jim Harbaugh in the fact that people like what he's done with the program enough to keep him there regardless of how well they do winning.
Couple more rapid fire. Sean, we appreciate all the love, man. We're glad you're here. Also, Steve says, can his alma mater, the UB Bulls, be a top 25 team in the near future? I wouldn't hold my breath, but stranger things have happened. I'm with Sharif saying they're better at basketball these days than they are at football. Also, Ian says he wouldn't let Kiffin coach Cal State Bakersfield. He's poison. He might be poison, but he knows how to recruit and he knows how to run an offense. And these days, that can get you a lot of places in college football. Also, Sharif says Mike Leach is a straight gangsta. I'm with you. Yeah. 100% with you on that. But we'll move on. Let's talk about some games this week that we need to get to before we get out of here. Hannah, I'm going to let you go first. What games are on your radar this week?
Go back a little bit from last week because I think there were just a few games that we didn't really talk about. Of course, Alabama and Ole Miss. not really the best game defensively for Alabama. Alabama's going to have to step up, especially with special teams struggled. Alabama has a lot to regain from last week. I don't think it was the most impressive win. We talked about Penn State, of course, shutting out Maryland, a good game. Arizona State beating Cal 24-17. That was a good win for Arizona State in the Pac-12. Certainly, I want to say this for a second. I'm circling Wisconsin as a team that's kind of on the iffy road because they beat Northwestern 24-15, but really not the most impressive win for a team they should have beaten. And then Oklahoma team who has continued to show themselves, kind of not off the Jalen Hurts hype. I think he still has a really good shot to win the Heisman. But those are some games from last week I thought were something to note going into this week. Now, this week, Alabama has a bye week. I think it's interesting. Alabama has 2 bye weeks this year, one this week and one before LSU. But they have a lot to improve on in the off week. Some of the games, of course, I'm circling Oklahoma, Texas Tech, or Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, because I think it's going to be a really good game to see who's going to, if Oklahoma State can remain in the top 25. I'm going to let you mention LSU. And then, of course, Iowa, Michigan, probably one of the biggest games this week with ranked teams is if Michigan can beat Iowa, I think Jim Harbaugh has secured his job for this year.
I think it's definitely a possibility. On the other hand, I look at Iowa, even though they're not generating a ton of pressure, especially in run defense with only 11 tackles for loss this season, they've only given up 3.5 yards a carry. I think Michigan's too weak up front to win this game. I think that's been their struggle pretty much. That's the reason the Army game stayed close is because they got dominated on both sides of the ball in the trenches. I think Michigan in the trenches is not a good enough team to beat a team like Iowa that defensively should take the run away. They're not a good enough passing team, in my opinion, to win this game. Iowa's going to win this one. I think it's going to be close. It's going to be 23-20. I think Iowa's going to pull it out, and we're really going to have more questions about Jim Harbaugh.
Okay. Now, of course, another game this week, of course, in the SEC. Several games, actually. No, this is always an exciting week because before we talk about Auburn, Florida, I think another team to watch is going to be Georgia, Tennessee. Because for some reason, this game always has a lot of history, especially in the SEC, for being an exciting game. Not saying Tennessee is going to win. They're not. Georgia's going to win this game. But I'm excited to see what Tennessee is going to be able to do at home against Georgia. Maybe make it a closer game. Maybe continue to prove a little bit of inconsistencies with Jake Fromm. That's what I'm looking for in the Tennessee-Georgia game. Not looking for Tennessee to win. I'm looking for Tennessee to kind of put a stop on Jake Fromm and the Jake Fromm hype because I think he's a little inconsistent right now. And then I guess another one to bring up would, of course, be Michigan State and Ohio State. Ohio State at home, but Michigan State seems to be a team every couple of years who's really put a damper in Ohio State. This is actually my upset of the week. I'm actually going to pick Michigan State to be Ohio State just because.
Just because. And that would take them out of the contention. But yes. I think I'm going to go Ohio State here. Real quick on the Tennessee game, if we want to talk about being bad in the trenches, Tennessee has been abysmal this year. Mm-hmm. I think Georgia's going to eat them alive. I think this is going to get ugly. It's going to be another one of those 50-10 games where Tennessee gets blown out. There's not a whole lot for them to bank on. Not to mention that Georgia defense playing against Garantano or whoever plays quarterback for Tennessee. It's going to be terrible. I'm with Ian. Tennessee is the Dolphins of college football right now. They can't seem to do anything right. I think Georgia wins this one, and I think they win it handily. I understand the rivalry perspective. Yep. New coach under Jeremy Pruitt might not get these guys up for this rivalry like a experienced, tenured coach might. I think this is all Georgia all the way. It may not be Jake Fromm. It might not have to be Jake Fromm. I think this is going to be Georgia in that running game for all 4 quarters. Going back to the Ohio State one versus Michigan State, I can't pick Michigan State to win this one. I know historically, Ohio State struggled in some of these games, but you look at how inconsistent Michigan State has been themselves. Maybe they get up for this game, but we haven't seen a complete performance out of this team all year long. Yep. Justin Fields should be fine against them. He should destroy them, especially since you look at last week what Indiana did to them, going 33 of 42 for 286 yards and 3 touchdowns. Indiana's not a powerhouse of a passing offense. Ohio State is. Look for Michigan State to give up a ton of yards through the air. And we're going to be talking about, is Justin Fields the next great college quarterback that's going to move on to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting to see what happened here because I think we're seeing a guy who, kind of like Jalen Hurts, Georgia was not the right fit for Justin Fields. I think kind of like Jacob Eason moving on to another team has been the best thing for them. I think you saw Jalen Hurts who, and I'll be honest, I think some of this was emotional. And we talked about this before, of course, way earlier when I started joining the show about, I think it was actually the very first show I joined, of course, having the counselor on the team kind of helping them make decisions. I think you saw a guy like Jalen Hurts who kind of was emotionally holding himself back. I think you saw a guy who was scared to make incomplete passes, scared to throw interceptions. When you're operating out of fear, you're not going to produce the results you want to produce. And I think seeing Jalen Hurts have another opportunity, start a clean slate at a different program, like Oklahoma, who plays the right type of game for him. We're seeing that with Justin Fields. We're seeing a program who I think is playing the right type of game that Justin Fields wants to play, is good at playing, and that's why we're seeing so many good results. I'm excited to see what Justin Fields is going to do. Out of all the quarterbacks we've seen, I mean, we'll look at Haskins, not doing the best job there in the NFL. I think Justin Fields has the opportunity to be one of the best QBs we've seen out of Ohio State in the past decade from college NFL. I think he's going to have the easiest adjustment, in my opinion.
He absolutely might. We'll move on. We'll talk about Auburn, number 7, going up against number 10, Florida. Again, this, to me, is going to be probably the game of the week. If you look at these two teams, not just because of the highest ranked, but we talk about a backup junior quarterback coming in to play for Florida in Kyle Trask. This is going to be an interesting matchup. Auburn's defense has been very, very effective this season in spurts, but has also had some kind of vulnerability as well. My question is, who's going to win that matchup? Can Kyle Trask lead these Gators to a decent scoreline? Because if they can put up 27, 28 points, their defense might be good enough shutting down Bo Nix to make the difference and have Florida win this game and jump Auburn in the rankings.
I'm going to pick Auburn. I think it's going to be a close game. I'm going to go 30-27 Auburn. Just because I was there at the Tennessee game. They did a good job defensively, but Florida has troubles causing themselves turnovers. They're fumbling. They're throwing poor passes. There's just so many things that Florida has to work on. Not saying they can't do it. The fact that this is at home, this is homecoming, it's a big game for Florida. I would not be surprised if Florida was able to win this game, but I'm going to pick Auburn just because Bo Nix, not the best stellar quarterback, but he does enough to win games. And I think if he gets the bare necessities, Auburn's going to come out and win this game.
And Ian said he would love to see Sparty get over on OSU. MSU, Michigan State, that is hit or miss team, but the Ohio State offense is on another level than the Michigan State defense. I'm 100% with you. On paper, this should be all Ohio State, but sometimes when we see those games, those are the games Ohio State drops. So,
like last week, I said North Carolina would be a good game against Clemson, and so that's what we're in Michigan State. When you're the underdog, you have a lot more to win for. Ohio State winning for a top 4, obviously a game. They want to stay in the top 4 in the rankings, but historically, these are the games. Time of year, these are the games when Ohio State starts to slip, and this is how they prove themselves out. If they can win out and go undefeated, I have no problem with them being in the playoff. If they lose one of these games, then that's going to be Ohio State to get in the playoff.
I think they can still make it. If you look at the way everything's going to shake out in the SEC, I mean, they won't send more than 2 teams from the SEC. You've got Clemson in the ACC that looks good. Everyone else is kind of fumbling around. We probably know Oklahoma's going to get there, but they stand the chance to lose a game or two, especially at the end of the season, like when they play Oklahoma State. Then the Pac-12 is a crapshoot. I think Ohio State can afford to drop one, whereas most years one can be the kiss of death when you play in the Big Ten. I think that Ohio State can afford to lose one, unless maybe Penn State keeps dominating and we see them go undefeated, but I don't see it. I think Ohio State can afford to drop one here.
We'll see. I mean, it's kind of like if Alabama was to lose at this point in the season, right? If they lose to LSU, Texas A&M, then it's going to be like, like top 5, top 6 maybe. Ohio State, I think they have to win out. I do. I think historically with them losing a game or two and then getting in or staying out, I mean, I think if I'm Ohio State, it doesn't really matter. We want to win out. And so I think if they have the focus to go undefeated, they can do it. But this week's test at home against Michigan State, it's going to be an interesting dynamic what's going to happen here.
Finally, our last 2 games I'm going to say pay attention to this week because they might have an impact in how things shake out. Washington, number 15, going up against Stanford. Stanford hasn't gotten a lot of respect this year because they had the Pac-12 kind of in their grasp early on and they let it fall apart. Right now, they're still a good team. They're not a great team, but they're a good team going up against Washington. I think Washington wins this one as well. When you look at the way Stanford's given up kind of yards through the air here recently, they've given up almost 10 yards a pass.
Yep.
I think Washington's going to be able to win this game through the air, but I think it has potential for some upset here. If they lose this game, Pac-12's dead in the water to me. I don't really see another team coming out here. I kept telling you it was going to be Utah. It was going to be Oregon. It was going to be Stanford. It was going to be USC. Now I'm telling you it's going to be Washington. We're running out of chances here if you're a Pac-12 fan. If they're going to send a team to the playoff, I think it's almost Washington or bust now.
Well, I don't think any of them are really strong enough to compete in the playoffs.
Maybe Oregon comes back. Oregon comes back. But
I don't see any team in the playoffs, they can hold their ground against Alabama or Georgia or Oklahoma. It's going to be like
able to hold your ground to get to the playoff too.
Against the Peach Bowl against Alabama. If I had to pick a team, I'd pick Washington. I think with Jacob Eason, I think with him, the guys on defense, they've done a good job replacing them. I think Peterson's done a great job there, Washington. But I think it was a little too inconsistent in the Pac-12. I think the Pac-12 did themselves a disservice by having so many teams hyped, like USC, Stanford, even Arizona State, Utah. Like, I mean, how many teams do you have in that part of the country that's like, oh, they're going to make the playoff? I don't see any team I'm overwhelmed with their capability. They're a good team. If I had to pick one, like I said at the beginning, I picked Washington from the get-go. I think Washington's going to be that team that we look at in a couple of weeks and say, hey, they're still there, but they have to win this game. If they lose this game, yes, I agree, they're out.
Also, Ian says, even if Iowa wins out this year, they will not be in the playoffs. Iowa doesn't have the name Ohio State does. If you beat Ohio State and you win the Big Ten, honestly, the way the Pac-12 is looking, I bet you Iowa would go to the playoff. Yep. I think right now you're sitting at 14. It would not be that big of a stretch if they won the Big Ten championship to see them in the playoff. Do I think that's going to happen? I do not. But there is the chance that they could do it. Also, Ian says no Pac-12 team will be in the top 7 at the end of the year. That seems very likely, especially when you look at all those good teams in the SEC. I think that's very likely as well. Yeah. Finally, pay attention to Utah State going up against LSU. Not necessarily for an upset here. I know a lot of people in the media are picking this as a would-be upset game. Maybe LSU loses. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying watch for is Jordan Love, the quarterback out of Utah State. He's getting a lot of attention from NFL scouts. There's a lot of hype around this kid right now. He's going up against an LSU team that has done a great job defending the pass, giving up only 6 yards a pass. I think when you look at this matchup, if this kid is going to have an NFL or a shot to make the NFL, whether it's a 3rd, 4th, 5th round quarterback, he needs to have a good performance in this LSU game. This is kind of a make or break game almost for his NFL career. There might be some fireworks in this one. LSU can throw. We all know that. I think Utah is going to get dominated when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. LSU's going to score a lot of points. But if Utah State can put up 30 points or 35 points and get a couple touchdowns through the air, we're going to be talking about Jordan Love being a legit NFL prospect come draft time next year.
Well, I think there's a few things to note here. I think Alabama and LSU have a similar problem. They have not started to execute the rush of their game. Right now, LSU is ranked 13th in the SEC alone with their running game. Not a good stat if you're an LSU team who's wanting to play a good game against Alabama here late November or early November. But the thing is this, LSU's going to have to run the ball, start the running game, do well. They're also going to play defense. They're going to have a really strong defensive line to be able to stop the running game and the passing game of Utah State. I don't see this set, but I do see this kind of like I saw some other games like Tennessee, Georgia, exposing some weaknesses. I would not be surprised to see Utah State hang around the first quarter, maybe 2 quarters of the game, kind of like Alabama, Ole Miss last week, where Ole Miss exposed some weaknesses of Alabama's front running game and defense. It's going to be the same situation with Utah State. I think LSU pulls this apart by maybe 17 or 20 points, but I do think in the beginning we're going to see a Utah State team expose some weaknesses, especially on the defensive front of LSU, that's going to have to be dealt with when you have Alabama coming to Baton Rouge or actually going to Tuscaloosa in a couple of weeks. It's going to be a big game. They have to work through these kinks now.
Ian says if Love looks good this game, his draft order goes into the first round. The only reason I'll disagree with that is because I don't see a lot of NFL openings at quarterback this year. Unless we see some teams finally give up on their quarterback, like Andy Dalton out in Cincinnati, and maybe the Dolphins hit the reset button and draft somebody, and maybe Jacksonville decides they want to draft a quarterback because Nick Foles isn't working out, even though I see that as highly unlikely, and the Titans and the Buccaneers. Unless we see a lot of these teams just come out and say we're going to take a first-round quarterback this year,
yep.
I don't know how many first-round quarterbacks we'll see. Remember, we've seen a lot of guys go in the first round these past couple of years. I don't know that the NFL can bear that many first-round quarterbacks going when we're talking about Jake Fromm and Justin Herbert still being available out there, Tua Tagovailoa. There are a lot of names on that list, Ian. The only reason I'll say maybe not a first round, maybe second round, maybe someone decides they want a high-quality backup that's kind of like a groom QB, like the Chargers or the Saints that have older quarterbacks. Right now, there are a lot of names in that first round. I think Julian Love's going to have a hard time getting into the first round.
Yeah. I mean, Jarrett Stidham's the right fit there for Patriots. Wouldn't be surprised with him, but, I mean, I agree with you. And I'll say this. We saw a lot of pre-draft trades that I think we're going to see again before the draft even happens. So that's going to things up, because last year the stock rose a lot with a lot of more defensive and offensive line positions once all the preseason trades happened, or pre-draft trades. I would not be surprised if we saw that again. And I agree with you. I think quarterback position where we're not going to see as many first rounds we had before.
Now, Ian says he sees Jacksonville looking for a quarterback at the end of around the time of the draft. The problem with that is they did give Nick Foles basically a guaranteed contract. They guaranteed a lot of that $84 million they gave him to be a 4-year quarterback for them. I'm not saying it's impossible, but they also have Gardner Minshew on top of it. They might decide that there's other spots they could spend on in the first round instead of quarterback. So that's why I say it's unlikely. But they could. They could just decide Gardner Minshew's not the guy, despite all the media hype and as fun as it is to play along with the memes and everything else. They might decide that Gardner Minshew's not good enough to be a legitimate NFL starter. They might decide Nick Foles might need to have some competition at the position that could take over the spot. Maybe they do draft a quarterback in the first round. It would be a very aggressive play from a team that has not been tremendously aggressive at the quarterback position, if that makes sense. I mean, they stuck with Blake Bortles for a while. So, impossible, no. Unlikely, yes. Yeah. All right, Hannah, before we get out of here, I'm going to kick us to final thoughts. What are you most looking forward to this week?
This week, I think it's a lot of cleanup for a bunch of teams like LSU, like Georgia, like Ohio State, maintenance. That's really what they're looking at. They're looking at a week where they have a team that's not going to be the biggest team to play, but it's a team enough to expose some weaknesses to help them get better before their bigger games. I'm excited to see Florida, Auburn. It's going to be really big note to see. Can Florida be a team that can actually get Georgia in the East? Are they a legitimate team, or is it the hype? Same with Auburn. Is this going to be a big road win for Auburn and Bo Nix, or is it going to be another sloppy performance? That's going to be one to watch. And then it's going to be the Pac-12. Can be the team in the Pac-12 to have any hopes of making it possibly to the playoff? I think not, but this is their last chance. So those are kind of my final thoughts.
All good points. I'm going to add one to it. I'm going to say Michigan and Iowa. The other reason you should be paying attention is everyone's already calling for Jim Harbaugh's head. If he drops another game against a ranked opponent here, all that talk's going to start getting louder. And just like I talked about before in the show, with social media these days, and as easy it is to complain on somebody, is Michigan going to have the fortitude to stick with him for another year if he drops this game as well? Especially with Ohio State looming on the horizon, this is going to be a very, very interesting matchup, and we're going to know more about Michigan's head coaching spot in the future after this week.
Yep, I agree.
All right, guys. Special thanks here. Thank you to Ian, Andrew, Nathan, Steven, Shannon, Steve, Eddie, Sharif, Chris, Sean, Frank. Guys, fantastic show. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a lot of fun. I know I had fun. I hope, Hannah, you did too.
I did.
We will be. Go ahead. We will be back on Friday to talk about the NFL and the week coming up. So we hope to catch you then. So for Sports Around the Bar, I am Jake. This is Hannah, and we hope to catch you guys then.
See y'all.